Chapter 1, The Human Body and Orientation, Lecture 1. In this course, we'll be covering anatomy and physiology. To begin with, we should define these terms. Anatomy is the study of the structure of body parts and their relationships to one another. So basically, how the human body is built and the materials that build it. Physiology, then, is the study of the function of the body's machinery. So how do the parts work together to create the overall function of the organism? As we go through and look at this, let's begin talking about some of the different ways that we might study anatomy. The first type of anatomy would be gross anatomy, and this is not the study of ugly-looking things or gross things. Rather, here we use the term gross anatomy to mean structures that we can see with the naked eye. The first way we might do this is in regional anatomy. In this, we look at all of the structures within a single part of the body, such as the abdomen or the leg. In this course, we will be using a systemic way of examining anatomy. Here we'll look at the gross anatomy of the body studied system by system. Now, for those of you that are in programs, especially nursing programs, you should also try and think of anatomy in terms of surface anatomy. This is a way of looking at anatomy and anatomical structures that are internal, how they relate to the overlying or external skin. Now, the next type of anatomy we might look at is microscopic anatomy. Here we see things that we cannot see unaided with the naked eye. Rather, we use microscopes. One thing we may need to look at microscopically would be to study cells. We call the study of the cell cytology. Here we see some important root words. When you see cyto, C-Y-T-O, in a word, that implies that we are looking at cells. The suffix ology means the study of. Likewise, we also may look at histology, which will be the study of tissues. We will see these in Chapter 3 when we study the cell, and Chapter 4 when we look at tissues. Developmental anatomy, then, is how anatomy and anatomical structures change throughout life. A specific branch of this would be embryology. This is the study of developmental changes within the body before birth. Depicted in the lecture, we see actually an embryonic mouse. That's not a human. What we can see are differences in the development between bone and cartilage. We will talk briefly about embryology and developmental anatomy at certain points throughout the semester. This brings us to the second main part, which is physiology. If anatomy are the structures, physiology then is the study of the operation of specific organ systems. This is focusing on the functions of the body, and in order to understand the functions of the body, we really have to understand these at the cellular or molecular level. In order to do this, we need to have a basic understanding of physics. The main places where we will have to discuss some amount of physics are when we are looking at electrical currents, which will become very important in chapters 9 and 11 when we look at muscles and the nervous system. Also in anatomy and physiology 2 when you discuss blood pressure. Also in the mechanics involved in the way the muscles move bone for movement. Anatomy and physiology work together, and we can describe this as the principle of complementarity. Here we see that function is always going to reflect the structure, and what we mean by this is that what a structure can do depends on its specific form. As we discuss anatomy and physiology, we will begin looking at the levels of structural organization. The first level we discuss will be the chemical level. This is where we will look at atoms and molecules. We will cover the majority of this portion in Chapter 2, which will be a nice review of chemistry for those of you who've had it before. The next level, when atoms come together to form molecules, molecules then come together to form the smallest unit of life, which we refer to as the cells. The example given here, this is a smooth muscle cell. Cells are made up of molecules. The next level then would be the tissue level. Shown here is a section of smooth muscle tissue. Tissues consist of similar types of cells. As you can see, this example has many cells that all are similar. The following level is the organ level. Depicted here is an organ known as a blood vessel. Organs, by definition, are made of different types of tissues. These serve a function. In this example, we see again our smooth muscle tissue, and we've also added in epithelial tissue and connective tissue. We will discuss these different types of tissues in Chapter 4. Organs by themselves do not function. What they must do is they must function together within an organ system. In the example here, we now take our blood vessel and we put it into an organ system such as the circulatory or cardiovascular system, which includes the blood vessels and the heart. Organ systems consist of different organs that work together closely. We have many different organ systems in the body, and since we are studying anatomy in a systemic manner, we will go through and look at this system by system. Each of these different systems is not completely independent. We see organ systems functioning together, and we also see organ systems interacting. An organism requires all of the organ systems functioning together. The organismal level, therefore, is made of many organ systems. This will be the majority of what we will talk about. Now we'll do a brief overview of some of the different organ systems we might see. The first would be the integumentary system. This is the system of the external body covering. This includes things like the skin, sweat gland, oils, hair, and nails. This protects deep tissues from injury. In addition, the integumentary system synthesizes vitamin D. The next system is the skeletal system. We will cover the skeletal system in several chapters, including chapters 6, 7, and 8. The skeletal system consists of the bones, cartilage, and ligaments. It helps protect and support the body organs. It provides a framework for the muscles. It also is the site of red blood cell formation, which we will discuss in further detail later on. We also will see that the bones store minerals. We all know that we need calcium and have strong bones. The reason for this is the bones act as a storage site. The muscular system we will look at the microscopic and molecular level in Chapter 9, and the gross anatomy will be covered in Anatomy and Physiology 2. The muscle system includes the muscles and tendons, and this system allows us to manipulate our external environment and move. It helps us to maintain posture and produces body heat. The nervous system, which we will cover in chapters 11, 12, and 13, is the fast-acting control system of the body, including the brain, spinal cord, and the nerves. This responds to stimuli by activating muscles and glands. The other chapters that we will not be covering in Anatomy and Physiology 1, but that you will cover in Anatomy and Physiology 2, will cover the following systems. This would be the cardiovascular system. This is the system of the heart and blood vessels, where the heart pumps the blood and the blood vessels transport the blood throughout the body, the blood being the major transport medium of the body. Closely associated with the cardiovascular system is the lymphatic system. This system includes the red bone marrow, the thymus, the spleen, lymph nodes, and the lymphatic vessels. This functions along with the cardiovascular system and helps to pick up fluid that's leaked from blood vessels and returns it to the blood. It also has a role in the immune system in that it disposes of debris, and it also houses the white blood cells. The respiratory system is a system that includes the nasal cavity, the pharynx, the trachea, the bronchi, and the lungs, and this is the system that keeps the blood supplied with oxygen and removes carbon dioxide. The digestive system, this is the system that includes the oral cavity, the esophagus, stomach, the small and large intestines, the rectum, the anus, and of course the liver. This is a system in which food is going to be broken down into absorbable units that can then be absorbed into the blood, and it serves to eliminate the foodstuff that cannot be digested as feces. The urinary system is also known as the excretory system, and this includes the kidneys, the ureter, the urinary bladder, and the urethra. This helps to eliminate nitrogenous wastes from the body through excretion. It also is important in regulating water, electrolyte, and pH balance within the blood. In males, the male reproductive system includes the prostate gland, the penis, the testes, the scrotum, and the ductus deferens. Here we see both the production of sperm and male sex hormones, as well as the ducts and glands that are necessary to deliver sperm to the female reproductive tract. In females, we see different structures in the reproductive system, including mammaries and ovaries, the uterine tubes or fallopian tubes, the uterus, and the vagina. Here we have ovaries producing eggs and hormones that are going to help to stimulate the production of those eggs. We will also see the fertilization and development of the fetus, and the mammary glands produce the milk to nourish the newborn. In terms of understanding the interrelationships between systems, we can imagine that an organism, specifically the human, simply are based on the interactions between these different systems. So the integumentary system that would protect, provide boundaries, and keep the internal body separate from the external environment. The digestive and the respiratory tracts then would open with the external environment, the digestive tract making a one-way or one-directional tube in which you have two openings where food enters, nutrients are absorbed, and then the unusable matter is released. The respiratory system would also be in contact with the external environment. Here we would have a two-way tube, so we have a single opening, we'd have the oxygen entering, carbon dioxide being released. Within the organism then, we have blood acting as a transport medium in which we could have the nutrients and the oxygen taken in by the digestive and respiratory tracts respectively, being shuttled throughout the body to bring those nutrients and oxygen to the cells where they are needed. On the other side of this, as the cells produce wastes then, the waste could be taken by the blood to the excretory system where they would be released. So these are some of the interactions and interrelationships that we're going to see when we look at these different organ systems. Now, in terms of necessary life functions, in order for life to occur, there are certain things that must be done, certain activities that either the cells or the organisms must do. One of these is maintaining boundaries. So on the cellular level, we will see this accomplished by plasma membranes. And in Chapter 3, we'll spend a good deal of time looking at plasma membranes. On the organismal level, the integumentary system and the skin tend to be the important components of maintaining our boundaries. Another important life function is movement, and this can be, of course, locomotion, the movement of the organism, but also things like propulsion or peristalsis and contractility. This is what will allow, for example, food to be passed down and through the digestive tract. That would be movement of the muscle involved in the esophagus. Another important necessary life function is responsiveness, and this is the ability to sense changes in the environment and to respond to them. We will see that the nervous system is highly responsible for this, and it allows us to do things such as sensing things that are hot and knowing to avoid them. Another necessary life function is the ability to break down ingested foodstuff, or digestion. We are unable to use on the cellular level the foodstuff that we take in, for example, these hot dogs, have to be broken down into their constituent macromolecules, which we will examine in Chapter 2 and review with the chemistry chapter. In terms of metabolism, this necessary life function is the sum total of all of the chemical reactions that occur in the body. Now, you may have heard the term metabolism used in different ways, but metabolism really, if you think about it, is what's going on in the cells in terms of the things that they are taking in, the cellular processes that are going on, and the wastes that they are producing to be nice, happy cells that are well maintained. When wastes are produced, those wastes must be removed from the body. We have excretion. Excretion would be part of the urinary system, or the urinary system is where we have excretion occurring in terms of the removal of those nitrogenous wastes. Nitrogenous wastes are things that are produced from cell metabolism. We also have something called egestion, and egestion is really the opposite side of digestion. Egestion is where we have the removal of food stuff that is not digestible, hence things like bowel movements. Another necessary life function is reproduction, and we see this again occurring both on the cellular and on the organismal level. So on the cellular level, a cell divides, producing two identical daughter cells through a process called mitosis. We will look at mitosis briefly in Chapter 3. Then through a separate process, our human cells can make sperm and egg cells through a process called meiosis, and those sperm and egg cells can unite to make an entirely new organism. So here we see both cellular and organismal reproduction. After reproduction has occurred, we then see growth. Growth is the increase in the body part or the size of the organism or cell. We will look at growth in humans. We will see that newborn humans and adult humans both grow, and we'll see that we see differential growth as well, so that the adult anatomy and the infant or newborn anatomy are slightly different due to these differential growth patterns. Now, all of these necessary life functions are things that cells or organisms have to do. Please do not confuse that with survival needs. Survival needs are things that are required. They are things. One of these things would be nutrients. Nutrients are needed for energy and for cell building. Nutrients are actually quite a varied term, so please do not confuse this with the dietary idea of nutrients or nutritious. Nutrients are things that are needed for energy or cell building, so most of the food that we consume are sources of nutrients. The other would be oxygen. Oxygen is necessary for metabolic reactions. The production of something called ATP is dependent upon the process of extracting oxygen from our environment. So the reason we breathe is to get oxygen, and the reason we need oxygen is for our cells to be able to undergo their metabolic reactions. Likewise, water. Water is necessary in terms of chemical reactions. We will look in Chapter 2 at several examples of how water is important in chemical reactions. On the cellular level, we need water. We also need to have a normal body temperature. For humans, that normal body temperature is 37 degrees Celsius or 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And the reason we have that normal body temperature is that is the temperature at which our body best functions, and the temperature at which our chemical reactions best occur. Now, the last of these, atmospheric pressure. Atmospheric pressure is quite important. Most of us, most humans, do not undergo massive changes in atmospheric pressure. We usually stay at a fairly stable atmospheric pressure. However, there are times where you can experience changes in atmospheric pressure. If you go to very high altitude or very deep ocean, you do experience fairly significant changes in atmospheric pressure. Let's take a moment and look at the homeostatic control mechanism. There are three main parts: the receptor, the control center, and the effector, and we will look at the way these interact in order to produce homeostasis. In order to understand homeostatic control mechanisms, we have to understand that homeostasis is a manner of keeping a balance within a biological system. As with anything that can be balanced, things can also come out of balance. So here we have our variable in homeostasis, and there must be some sort of change acting upon it that's going to create an imbalance. That change that's producing the movement of the variable, that is our stimulus. Now the stimulus, or that change, is going to be detected by the receptor. This receptor in biological systems is usually some sort of sensory cell. That receptor will then communicate information through what's called an afferent pathway, sending that information to the control center. In most biological systems, that control center would be the brain or other parts of the central nervous system. That control center then is going to send information in terms of a response out to an effector. The effector are often muscles and or glands. That effector then has the ability to bring about a change, thereby returning our variable to homeostasis. Now, in terms of discussing this, it's often helpful to look at a non-biological example. So we're going to look at the example of a home heating system. What we have is a certain balance in terms of the temperature of the room. When there is a stimulus of a rising room temperature, the temperature in the room is going up, that takes us out of balance, out of homeostasis. That is sensed by a thermometer. Right? So in this case, we have the variable being sensed by a sensor or a thermometer. That information is then sent to the control center, which would be the thermostat, that little doohickey that hangs on the wall that you set at, say, 68 degrees. That thermostat, or the control center that's set at 68, that is the set point. Right? Or in humans and in biological systems, it's the set range. When the temperature of the room goes up and beyond that amount, we then see a change that's going to be sent. What happens from the thermostat, we then have a signal being sent to the heater to shut the heat off. Now, with the heater being shut off, we hope that the room temperature will start to drop, leading to a return to balance. Now, of course, what can happen, that room temperature can drop, bringing us back to balance, but eventually it might drop too much. Right? Here we have the stimulus of a dropping room temperature. This will also be detected or received by the thermometer and the thermostat. That information would be sent to the control center. Now this thermostat in the control center is registering temperatures that are lower than our set point. That then sends a signal to the effector, in this case the heater, to turn the heat back on, thereby bringing the temperature in the room back into balance. What we see here is a clear example of what is called negative feedback. In this example, we have the stimulus being the rising and or dropping room temperature, leading to the opposite effect occurring in the effector. So when the room starts to get too cold, we turn the heat on. When the room starts to get hot, we turn the heat off.